Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mary Bingham, and I'm the one who does all the videos for this YouTube channel. And I'm proud to say that I have started a new series on Google Meet, and it's called Wednesdays with Winthrop Jr. And again, it's a weekly get-together on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The link to join episode 2 on May 1st, 2024 will be in the comments section as well as the description. We hope you join us. Videos of the same content will be uploaded to YouTube on Friday afternoons. So this is episode 1, and what I hope to attain during all of these episodes is to bring to light more so the relationship between John Winthrop Jr. and his father, John Winthrop Sr., through the correspondence that they shared, which is all recorded at the Massachusetts Historical Society in the Winthrop Family Papers. And once those letters, that correspondence is done in 1649, then I will continue on with John Winthrop Jr.'s legacy in Connecticut and how he saved so many lives during the Connecticut witch trials and his role that he played as governor there, all the way through to his death in 1676. So I hope that you will be able to join me for this weekly get-together for months to come. So here it is, episode 1. Picture it, 1622, Dublin, Ireland. John Winthrop Sr. had visited Ireland for 2 reasons. The first reason was to contemplate a permanent move due to a more stable religious atmosphere. By this time in England, many of the older clergy who supported the reform had died or were forced into exile, and the number of those younger men joining the effort were not as many in numbers. This was the year when King James prohibited sermons defending predestination, which led way 3 years later, after the coronation of King Charles I, to the rise of Laudianism. And Laudianism was an anti-Calvinistic movement started by Archbishop William Laud, who favored free will over predestination. It was also around this time when clergy who did not follow the rules would have been dragged into court and be tried for religious and spiritual offenses. Between 1622 and 1625, John Winthrop Sr. felt that England was steering away from the godliness and would be heavily punished. The lure towards Ireland was that it was totally separated from the Church of England, and the lure towards Trinity College for his son was that the teachings were pro-Calvinism and the supplice, or the outer garment, the outer white garment worn over the cassock by the Catholic clergy, was not worn during services. The second reason was, of course, to see if Trinity College was a good educational fit for his son. Though the Winthrop family remained at Groton Manor, Suffolk, England, 16-year-old John Winthrop Jr. left home to start to forge a future for himself, of course, at Trinity. John Jr. was lovingly supported by and looked after by his Aunt Lucy Winthrop Downing and her new husband, Emmanuel, who lived close by, and they welcomed John into their home, along with, of course, Emmanuel's children from his first marriage. And they lived at Mount Rath Plantation. Now, we're going to go back to Groton Manor for a moment, because that's where most of this primary or first correspondence begins from John Winthrop Sr. So Groton Manor was actually purchased by Adam Winthrop Sr., who was John Sr.'s grandfather, in 1544 from the Crown. This purchase happened following the dissolution of St. Edmund's Abbey, along with many other monasteries, when King Henry VIII set up the Church of England. These monasteries did not lack for wealth and served as a reminder for money-loving Henry, who spent too much for a lifestyle he couldn't afford and wars that negatively impacted the economic growth of England. By dissolving these monasteries, Henry was able to acquire all of their wealth. So Adam spent £409 for this 250-acre property, along with the rights to a mill and the rights to collect wood as well as fishing. In turn, he had to provide arms, armor, and soldiers in the event of a war. However, at a later date, Adam traded these obligations for cash payments to the crown. So it is evident that the Forth and the Winthrop families knew each other, as Adam Winthrop recorded in a folio that Mary Forth's father, John Forth, visited Adam in January of 1605. One might surmise that they discussed a marriage of John Sr. and Mary, because just 3 months later, John and Mary were married at the Forth estate at Great Stambridge after a brief courtship that lasted only 3 months. John Winthrop Sr. moved his family from Great Stambridge to Groton Manor in 1613 after the death of Mary's father. 2 years later, John Jr. would have been 7 years old when his mother sadly died. And we believe she died probably as a result of childbirth. John Sr. had become a widow at the tender age of 27, navigating not only his own grief, but that of his 4 young children. This horrific loss for the entire Winthrop family was the first of many transitions for young John that probably set the stage for him becoming a quote-unquote man on the move, as John Jr. did not establish firm roots until his final move to Connecticut about the year 1646, when he became founder of what is today known as New London, Connecticut. As was the custom, John Sr. remarried quickly after Mary's death, and the family welcomed their first beloved stepmother, Thomasine Clopton Winthrop. Thomasine, sadly, died a year later, and again this was most likely due to complications from childbirth. The child did not survive infancy. Once again, imagine the grief of John Sr. as he lost both his wife again and child while trying to make sure the needs of his other children were met. John Sr. soon married for the 3rd time, Margaret Tyndall Winthrop. Once John Jr. was about settled with his new stepmother, he was then sent off to St. Edmund Free Grammar School, a prep school, before continuing his education at Trinity College. Adam, John Jr.'s grandfather, was concerned for his grandson and gave the young man a very special gift, which he started to prepare while John Jr. was still at Bury's. A loving gesture, to say the least. Adam not only recorded everyday comings and goings at the manor, but he also recorded who visited, weather updates, and every Thursday lecture given by 25 different clergymen over a 1-year period in the almanac, which today we would basically known as a journal. Then he gave this almanac to John Jr. for him to reflect when he may have been missing friends and other loved ones while away at school. These recorded lectures on Thursdays were very poignant because they would no longer be permitted after Adam recorded them for his grandson. So let's talk now a little bit about Adam Winthrop Jr., John Sr.'s father and John Jr.'s grandfather, obviously. He was born in 1548 at Groton Manor in the Stour Valley region, where the River Stour flows through 6 townships, 2 of which the Winthrop family knew well, Groton and Edwardstown. From the time of his birth, Adam lived in the thick of the Protestant Reformation. As Adam grew, he most likely became somewhat aware that his much older brother, William, worshipped underground and secretly offered to aid to free imprisoned reformists and smuggled funds to those who were exiled, all to avoid the wrath of the very Catholic Queen Mary. However, this work and those who performed it were led somewhat out of the shadows when Elizabeth I was crowned in 1558. Adam would continue to be influenced by William, who helped fund the first-year salaries paid to the crown of several newly ordained Protestant ministers, which was the custom of the time. The reformers who lived at Stour Valley followed strict worship rules, observance of the Sabbath, and the clergy were not to wear vestments, even though it was mandated to do so in 1604. They did not sign the cross, but they favored fast days, and everyone had to learn to read, including women and children, so that they could read the Bible. The reformers living in this area practiced intolerance to those holding views much more radical than their own, such as those living close by who belonged to the sect known as the Family of Love, also known as the Familists. This sect held the belief that nature ruled everything, though God was involved somehow, and they also denied the Trinity was not communicated directly by God. They also believed that their infant baptism was not valid and were baptized again as adults after public confession of their sins, almost like becoming, and I quote, born again. I was reminded of Adam Winthrop Jr.'s grandson, of course, John, as I read Francis Bremer's account of young Adam's life. Both men did not graduate from the first colleges they attended. Both men were part of the Inner Temple. Both men managed estates. And because John Jr. had actually helped manage his father's estate when they moved to the colonies, and Adam managed the estate of his late father's on behalf of his absentee brother John, who evidently was never a good brother to Adam. Both men enjoyed books, and according to Adam's collection, after his interest in reading about religion, he had an interest in medicine and science, and this is possibly the source where John Jr.'s interest in alchemy originated, or at least one of the sources. We're going to talk about the second source in next week's episode or next week's meeting. It is no wonder that Adam expressed that natural grandfatherly love to John Jr. when he bestowed that precious gift of the almanac, whom he most likely saw as so similar to himself. Now, let's move on to John Winthrop's relationship with his father as we begin the deep dive into their correspondence to one another. Please listen to the contents of the letter written by John Winthrop Jr.'s father dated August 6th, 1622, and I will do my best to offer an environmental and historical background where appropriate. And please feel free to make comments. For those of you that are listening that know about this history, feel free to make comments to add to any of the discussion. That would be wonderful. So John Sr. begins the letter and by saying, "To my beloved son, John Winthrop, at the college in Dublin. Though I have received no letters from you, I cannot pass by any opportunity without the testimony of my fatherly affection and care for your welfare, for which I respect. I am content to have you absent from me in so far a distance." So it seems to me that even though John Sr. had not heard from his son, he wants to take a moment to tell him that he loves him and he cares for him, even though he's so far away. Then John Sr. goes on to write, "For I know that in respect of yourself, the place that is beautiful, and in respect of the Almighty, his providence and power is alike in all places." Now, John Winthrop Sr. first studied the ministry when he entered Trinity College at Cambridge when he was 14 years old, before he switched to law. So why the switch? We don't know for sure, but it could be because the king attempted to silence those men who studied to become ministers while voicing opposing religious views, thus depriving them of a career. John Sr.'s faith remained strong and weaved into every aspect of his life until his own death. Though his religious views became stricter over time, his father did not dictate to him to totally separate. Go back. His faith did not dictate to him to totally separate from the Church of England, but to modify from within. It's also important to note that John Sr.'s father was friends with a die-hard Catholic, William Mannock. These two men visited each other and shared meals together. In fact, William gifted Adam, who was a clothier by trade, 3 yards of silk in 1602. So John Sr. would have been aware and would have been influenced a little bit by his father's relationships with the Catholics at those times. And then I also think that John Sr. would not have, John Sr. would not have referred to himself as a Puritan, as he would have considered that term to be derogatory. He would have considered himself to be part of, and I quote, the people of God. And also John Sr. may have been referring to the place of beauty initially as the college itself and the grounds upon which it sat. However, he reminded his son, it seems to me, that beauty is the presence of God. Then John Sr. goes on to write, "And for my own comfort, it shall be in your prosperity and well-doing wheresoever. And because I cannot so often put you in mind of those things which concern your good, as if you were nearer to me, it must be your care the better to observe and ruminate those instructions which I give you, and the better to apply the other good means which you have. Especially labor by all means to imprint in your heart the fear of God, and let not the fearful profaneness and contempt of ungodly men diminish the reverent and awful regard of his great mystery in your heart." Seems to me again that John Sr. encouraged, if not warned, his son to stay on the path of righteousness and not fall to temptation others offered. Otherwise, and he goes on to write, "But remember, still the time is at hand when they call to the mountains to hide them from the face of him whom now they slight and neglect, etc." Maybe John Sr. was referring to the book of Revelations, chapter 6, verses 16 and 17, which says, and I quote, "And said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand." And it also seems that John Sr. continued to warn his son what would happen to those men who were not of God on the day of judgment. And he goes on to write, "I have written to you more largely by one Mr. Southwell, and now I am at little leisure. When you write back, let me know how the state of your college, etc., and how you like, etc." It's interesting that Mr. Southwell is not mentioned anywhere else in the Winthrop Family Papers. Further research has unveiled that he could be only one of 2 men. Anthony Southwell, who was a lawyer hailing from Woodrising, Norfolk, England, which was about 49 miles north of the Winthrop estate at Groton. Or Mr. Southwell could also be known as Anthony's son, Robert. And not much is, like I said, since not much is known about Anthony, but we do find a little more about Robert, who was a contemporary of John Winthrop Jr., because we know that he was born about the year 1607, and his mother was Margaret Shelton Southwell. So Robert married Helena Gore and moved to Ireland, probably closer to the end of the reign of James I, maybe sometime before 1625. He protected and oversaw the forfeited Munster plantation, located about 135 miles southeast of the plantation of Mountrath, where the Downings lived. Munster was seized by the English crown after the execution of Earl of Desmond in 1583. This plantation was so large, it incorporated 4 counties known today as Cork, Kerry, Limerick, and Tipperary. The original undertakers had property upwards to 40,000 acres. As part of the plantation scheme, the original plantation owners were required to bring English settlers to live and settle on their property. Only the Protestant Irish could be part of this settlement, which caused great distress amongst the Gaelic clans who lived around the plantation. And then John Sr. goes on to write, "And remember my love to your Reverend Tutor." So I had a hard time finding out who Reverend Tutor was, but eventually, thank you to author Francis Bremer and historian, and also Winthrop Sr. and Jr. Scholar, he identified him as Joshua Hoyle. And Joshua Hoyle was the rector of Dublin Parish of St. Werburgh. And then John Winthrop Sr. goes on to write, "Your grandfather, grandmother, and mother salute and bless you." The grandparents mentioned would most likely be John Sr.'s parents, Adam and Ann Winthrop, who died in 1623 and 1629 respectively, because both of John Jr.'s maternal grandparents were deceased by 1622. And of course, the mother mentioned would have been John Sr.'s third wife, Margaret Tyndall Winthrop. Then he goes on to say, "Your brothers and sister are in health, I praise God." The brothers and sister would be Henry, fourth, Adam, and Mary, who would go on to marry Samuel Dudley, was the son of Governor Thomas Dudley. And then in closing, John Winthrop Sr. writes, "The Lord in mercy season your heart with his grace and keep you from the lusts of youth and the evil of the times. So I rest, your loving father, John Winthrop, Groton, August 6th, 1622. Please join me next Wednesday evening, again, May 1st, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with the Google link provided in the comments and the description. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Have a great day.